So here we are again, still in lockdown. This is now, I think, the fourth or fifth one of these little presentations, if you want to call it a presentation, just little chats based on people's questions that they've been firing in over the last few days. So hopefully everybody's keeping safe, doing the right things at home, social distancing and all that malarkey, and this is, I think, a really good opportunity to speak to coaches that I don't know, that I've never met in the majority of cases. It seems to be reasonably popular, with, I think, over 2,700 people have viewed the session that I did last weekend. Possibly just thinking that maybe once a week will be enough. I know that there's a lot of other people out there doing webinars and using different platforms to try and educate coaches and help coaches to get through this tricky period while everybody's stuck at home. I know that there's a lot of people that have been tuning in who don't really have any interest in football at all. Friends of mine, I can just see one of my old teachers is tuning in, so the pressure is absolutely on from my point of view. But as I've said to you before, realistically all I'm doing, certainly with these last few presentations that I've done, is answering your questions. So it's, great credit to you that people want to ask. I've said it before on here that there's no such thing as a stupid question. I go back to my time as an FA tutor, when we would always ask the group, does anybody want to know anything else? Has anybody got any questions before we go out and do a practical or whatever it might be? And invariably no hands would go up, nobody would ask anything, and then as soon as half the people left the room, somebody would come up with a really good question which probably half a dozen other people wanted to know the answer to. So when I do ask for questions, whatever if there's anything you're thinking about over the course of the next week or so, just jot your questions down, send them to me via direct message or underneath any of the links that I post on the various Facebook coaching sites, and I'll try and pick up on it. So I'll probably look to do this now, as I said, once a week, rather than try and fit it in every 5 days and people get a bit fed up. It's certainly keeping me sane. The challenge is there for me, if I don't know the answer, to go and find the answer for people. So it's good. I'm quite enjoying interacting with people. We've progressed from the first one where I was in this same room, but I was literally laid on the floor in a sort of 5 or 6 foot space, trying to work out how best to get the iPad to show the tactics board that I was using. I've since been given this fantastic tactics table that you can see in front of you, to help me do this. I really appreciate that from Grassroots Coaching, who sent me this via Soccer Social London on Twitter. So really appreciate it. Really appreciate everybody joining in and asking questions. I will keep coming up there towards where you are to read the screen, because I can't read it from this side of the room, if I think that someone's asked a question before it disappears off the screen. And bear in mind that when I see your questions as they come up on the screen, if it's quite a long question, I only get to see the first portion of it, so you might have to ask it in 2 bits, or I'll ask you to ask it in 2 bits. But I'll make a start on the questions that I've got down here, and it may be that I say something that you don't agree with. That's absolutely fine. The whole sport is based around opinions. If I'm honest, people will have their way of doing certain things. This is my way. Where people have asked me a question, this is my way. It's not the only way. It's not guaranteed to work for you with your players. but we'll have a look at it. So I'll get into the questions. For some of them, we'll use the magnets and the tactics board where people have asked me tactical stuff, and I'll try and illustrate that on here. But some of it's just general questions about football player development. So we'll kick off. So the first question that came in was from Feifei Nguyen. Apologies if that's not pronounced correctly. And the question was, how do you handle connections with, or the first part of the question was, how do you handle connections with parents? And for me, it's a really important subject, because when I first came into academy coaching, there was a lot of people, kind of would warn you off about getting too close to parents and sharing too much information with parents. But as well as being your worst enemy, they can be your best friend. So it's really, really important that you share communication. I don't mean that in a pally kind of way, but in terms of delivering a message to your players. The kids' parents are paramount in making sure that relationships work in both directions. So share information with your parents, share knowledge with your parents, let them know what you're doing, and more importantly, why you're doing it. That way you are likely, in my opinion, to get less interference from the sidelines. If you share your knowledge and your reasons for doing a certain thing with your parents, then it gives them one less thing to come back at you and challenge, because actually you've already explained it once. So it's important to get a good working relationship with parents, not a social relationship. And this is particularly important with academy football, I think. And it can be sometimes difficult because you know people socially, or you might have known them before you've signed their kids, for example. But it's quite important to try and keep the football side of it on a professional level rather than a social level. We're not challenging each other as friends, but working with parents is really important, and it shouldn't be neglected. As I say, particularly with academy football. Grassroots football, I would guess, is different, because a lot of those relationships are probably socially based rather than professionally based. And some of the behaviours that you see on the sidelines at grassroots football aren't great, but because little Johnny's dad is your best mate or your work colleague, for example, the ability to challenge their behaviour on the touchline, for example, is much more difficult. So I think that having a good working relationship with the parents is important, and it's important that they respect your role in what you're trying to do. You're trying to do it for a reason. You're trying to do it to develop players and give them a great experience. And it's not really a great experience for people if you've got the coach on this side of the pitch here, giving technical information, constructive feedback, whatever, and over this side of the pitch you've got a line of parents all shouting different things, because the people on this side of the pitch, the parents, spectators watching the game, are really only interested in that player, little Johnny. So whichever little Johnny belongs to on this side of the pitch, that's the only bit they're really bothered about. Your involvement from this side of the pitch as the coach is much more global. They're all part of your team. They're all your responsibility during that period of time. So establish a professional relationship with your parents rather than a social one. If you have a social one as well, try and have a conversation at some point with those parents to say, look, when we're doing this, you have to trust me. If you don't trust me, then why would you bring your kids to me? So that's the way I'd look at the first part of that question. And this one was interesting. Again, Feifei Nguyen, how do you work it out with your co-coach when your philosophies conflict? Well, I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, and I appreciate not everybody's watched every broadcast that I've done. I can't see a reason why, if you're working with another coach, you would have conflicting philosophies. Because, as I've already mentioned, if you've got a club, a whole club philosophy, the person that you work with should have the same philosophy as you when it comes to dealing with this part of the game, the one where you have to work together with your group of players. You know, you might like the way that Barcelona plays, but he likes the way that Atletico Madrid play. Now they're two completely different styles of football, if you like. And away from your game with your 5-a-side, 7-a-side, 9-a-side, 11-a-side, whatever it is, that's fine. You can have those different opinions, ideologies, for example. But when you two come together to work with your players twice a week, 3 times a week, plus your game at the weekend, your philosophy for that moment in time is a whole club philosophy. It's a global thing where, you know, I can park my style of play or my preferred way of coaching because we've now got a club philosophy which is there to benefit all of this group of players that you've got. So you need to make sure that, and if you're in a position like I am now to a certain extent and have been in the past, where it's your job to pair up coaches, then you need to think about that really carefully before you go and stick 2 people together who've got opposing views or who don't buy into that whole club philosophy and mentality. So I hope that answers that particular question. You have to part your differences. Okay, so the next question is a tactical one. It came in from Derek Johnston. How would you best explain and teach midfield dominance in a flat 4 rather than a double pivot? So, let's get some, forget the numbers, don't worry about the numbers if you can see the numbers. So if I'm playing with a flat 4, and I presume that by playing with a double pivot, he probably means something like playing that 4-2-3-1 formation. If I mentioned this previously when I was doing the tactical thing as well. If I've got a midfield 4 in there, one of the things that I always do, and again, I spoke about this in the past, we give out a sheet of roles and responsibilities in possession and out of possession to all of our players for every position, for every formation. If we change formations, obviously some of the key points around roles and responsibilities stay exactly the same. But this is one of the things we very rarely, I've played nearly the whole of my career when I played in, coming through the army, in a 4-4-2 in midfield. It was a real simple game playing football in the army. Nearly everybody played 4-4-2. And I would generally be the left-hand side of the central midfield. As long as these two understand that, and that if one goes up, one stays back, it should never be a problem. It doesn't have to be the same player all the time. That player can go forward. But when he sees that player, when this player here sees that player go in front of him there, he needs to realise and recognise that he needs to do that, come over that way and let him have his little foray up front for whatever he's gone up there for. In terms of teaching the midfield to dominate, I think it depends what you're playing against. So, for example, if the opposition were playing with a 3-man midfield against your 4-man midfield, a lot of people would go on about this. Well, we're outnumbered now in the middle of pitch 3v2. Okay, so when you're out of possession, bring these 2 in, and now you're not outnumbered, you actually outnumber them. So in terms of dominance, it's to do with numbers. That would be one way of dealing with that. If they're playing with 3 narrow in central midfield and you've got 4 spread across the pitch, well, you only need 4 spread across the pitch when you've got the ball in order to try and get in behind their narrow three. So if they've got the ball, you could just narrow up. Depending if they're playing with three in midfield, you would expect them to have three up front. So as long as you've got one more than them there, you could always bring one of your forward players back in a 4-4-2. So they could come back in and help to try and re-establish midfield dominance, if that makes sense. So there's different ways that you can do it, but essentially it's a numbers game. So what I would say is that when you're out of possession, just narrow up as a 4. Just check that there's nothing popped up on there. Okay, cool. So hopefully that answers Derek's question about playing with 4 in midfield. The next question came in from Matthew Powell, and it was about pressing triggers and different types of triggers that you use. So when we talk about triggers to press for our players, there's some just real basic non-negotiables. If there's a slow square pass at the back, then you would go and press the player who's about to receive the ball. If you're playing on a bobbly pitch, for example, and the ball bounces up and it looks like he's going to be under pressure, struggle to receive, then go and press. If he has a poor first touch, go and press. So that's they're the 3 main triggers that we would look at: poor pass, slow pass, bad touch. Those kinds of things. If you think the ball's not going to get there, don't go press the man, try and intercept the ball. But that depends on your speed, or your pace. So looking at little things to do with pressing. Generally, so the red team are trying to play out from the back with the ball. We might have a 4-3-3. For example, there's their midfield 3 coming and showing to try and get on the ball. They won't all come deep, obviously. Our 3 pushed up there. There's certain places that you might want to allow the ball to go to. So I might like the ball to go there. As that ball is travelling from the keeper to the fullback, this player has got to be in a position where he cuts off a forward pass. So first thing is, don't run down there towards the ball, don't run directly towards the ball, get across there and then go and press. So if he's dropped in there and got the ball, then we go and press. Now that we've done that, it's got to be done for a reason. So what else do we do? Go and cut off the square pass there. He goes and shows in there for the ball. Go and press. So you're pressing with the ball, pressing without the ball. He might go in there, or he might come higher, just follow him. He might go in there, just follow him. So ideally now, the option that you want is for this player here, the left back who's got the ball, is to play it back to the goalkeeper. What you don't want him to do is switch it. So by the centre forward, the striker here, going and getting between the full back and the centre back, it takes that option away. He can now play it back to the keeper, they can come out the other side, that's fine. While they're dishing the ball around the back, the ball's going to travel there 30 yards back to the keeper. We just all adjust. He can now come off, he can come in between, he can go over there, he can go over there. So all the time the game's moving, everybody's moving, and you move in relation to the ball. Always, everything you do is in relation to the ball. Is there anything else on that one? Hopefully, Matt Powell, that's answered your question. If not, come back at me. The next question came in from Philip Rowbottom. So Philip asked, would you set up your team to play a high press, a mid or low block, based on the ability of your players or the opposition? So this is another of those questions that if you work to a curriculum where you might be working on let's say you're working on a high press for 1 week of training out of a 4-week block, 6-week block, 8-week block, whatever you train. Our focus in that game would be the high press. We wouldn't change our tactics. We wouldn't change our formation that we're working with. So if we're playing with a 4-3-3, and our scheme of work, if you like, for that week is to press in the final third, that's what we would do. We wouldn't change that based on the game, because again, the academy game at 9s to 16s there's no leagues involved. There's no real strong focus on results. So we work to a syllabus, and that's what we look at for that week. So if it's on defending with a mid block, we would let them play out of the back. We would drop everybody back in here. So they're playing out the back. The Reds are playing out the back. Our start positions for our strikers might be there. So the 3 blues here, I'll just let them have the ball, and then we'll start to press in this middle third of the pitch. So we don't change our tactics based on the game. We have a focus for that week, and there's obviously everything else that happens within the game will be a part of what happens on a Sunday, but the focus is on, are we pressing high or are we defending with a mid block? When I spoke about low block the other week, for me personally, low block would never be a tactic. It's something that you do when the opposition get into your final third. But I would never use a low block as a tactic, because there's a lot of risk involved around your goal. I could understand why some teams might do that if they were particularly effective on the counter-attack, but I would say that you're much better off counter-attacking from the back of the middle third. So if I move my book, from that line there forward, rather than from my 18-yard line. I wouldn't deliberately set out to defend my 18-yard line, but that's just me. Chris McLaughlin asked about adapting to in-game trends. So the opposition set up different to what you expect, or your opponents make drastic changes and you need to respond. So with that, I guess in a grassroots game where you play each other a little bit more often, and teams probably have you might have the same they might have the same players from 1 year to the next. Academy football's like that, but a little bit, we don't go and scout what our we don't scout our local teams, and if they run their academy similar to us, where we change formation after a set number of weeks, we don't know what formation they might be playing. So if we play a team at the start of the season, say in September or October, and then we don't play them again till January, we can't rely on the fact that they played 4-3-3 in September or October, because they might now be playing a different formation. But within the game, and again, this is just from my perspective with an academy team, we will not very often change our formation within a game. You might have to do it if you're playing with, let's say you're playing 4-2-3-1, you've only got one out-and-out number 9, and that number 9 gets injured. You might then have to change or we might have to change to a different formation to try and to cope with that particular adjustment. But that'll be something that's forced on us by our circumstances. if we were playing three at the back and we kept getting murdered down the sides of the pitch, if the result was becoming a concern, let's say if we conceded 1 or 2 goals that way, it's probably not the end of the world. But if we kept getting caught out in those areas, then I might switch to a back four, or more than likely in our case, I would question the work rate of my two wing backs. Why aren't you getting back? Why does he keep getting in on your side? Why do they keep getting crosses in from there? Where are you when he does it? That kind of questioning about the player who should be filling in. So you have to have a good understanding of what's going on within the game. If you're going to change your tactics, you've got to have a good reason to do it, rather than just on a whim. And more importantly, from your perspective, your players have got to understand why you're doing it and know what you're doing. So if you only ever train 4-4-2, but then within a game you suddenly decide that because you've seen it on the telly last weekend, you're going to go 3-5-2, 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, or something else, but your players have never experienced that in training, that's a real steep learning curve for them, just because you shouted something on from the touchline, to be able to expect your players to then go on and do that within a game if they've never practiced it. So I would say that if you've got a game plan, you stick to it. And realistically, if you need to make changes, I would probably try and wait till half time and do it at half time. If you play quarters, it's even easier. You know, some teams will play 4 20-minute periods, or some 3:30s, 3:25s. It's easier to make any changes in those breaks because, for example, you can use the tactics board and give your players a visual, move some magnets around, move some players around, draw some lines on there, pictures on there, whatever you need to do. But changing formation or changing tactics mid-game, you need to be really careful with, unless it's something that you're confident that your players can do without too much adjustment. Just my thoughts. So the next question was from this is a $1 million question, really. David McManus, what is the secret to becoming a good coach? It's a two-part question. What is the secret to becoming a good coach? It's almost impossible to answer, because who defines what a good coach is? Is a good coach the one who, regardless of his players, manages to get them to win loads of games? Is a good coach the one who is able to spend lots and lots of time with players of a lesser ability and make them better? So coaching takes on all kinds of different forms, and what people's expectations are from that coach will determine whether he is a good coach or not, in that person's opinion. So I think that you've got to be empathetic. You've got to have an understanding of your players. You've got to know why your players are there. That's probably the most important thing if you're going to be a good coach. If your players are there to get better, but you don't spend any time with them, but your team keeps winning games, then in some respects you're not a good coach, because you're ignoring the players that need your help. So you really, we've had some quite good discussions in the last couple of days on Twitter around this, about what, the psych and social side of it. It tends to be almost an afterthought with a lot of people. But actually, if you were to question coaches appropriately, you'd find that they're doing a lot of the psychosocial stuff without even knowing about it. It's this unconscious competence. Oh yeah, I do that. I do understand why the players are there. I do talk to them about things that other than football, when they arrive or when we get a minute. So that having that empathy with your group, with your players, will help you to become a better coach, because you know why they're there. If you don't know why they're there, then how do you know what to do? How do you know? It's like driving. If I don't know where I'm going, I'll never get there. So you've got to know where your players are going. If the players are coming to you to make them better, but you just spend all your time on the group making the team better, then you'll have partial success. But if if that player needs some additional help, but you haven't got the time to do it, then he probably doesn't consider you to be a good coach. You've got to have sufficient knowledge to be able to put on a variety of coaching sessions. So that would help to make you a good coach. But you can't just keep nicking my stuff or somebody else's stuff off Twitter and taking it back to your grassroots under 11s when I've designed it for under 16 academy players. Or you can't take something off Twitter because it says Pep Guardiola counter-attacking session, because you haven't got £50 million fullbacks and £100 million strikers. So, but you can still do that same session, but you've got to adapt it. You've got to make it fit your players. And I think Pep said something about thieving and being a magpie and collecting, and that's great. Collect sessions, collect ideas, but make sure that when you deliver it, that it's right for your players. You haven't got you haven't got two £50 million centre backs, so don't expect them to be able to do what he wants John Stones and Laporte to do, for example. Be realistic about what you can get out of that session. So, good knowledge of your players. Why are they there? What do they expect from you? Good knowledge of the game, an understanding of how to put on appropriate practices, and develop all your players within that. And there's a million and one other things. You could spend hours and hours talking about what makes a good coach, and ultimately you might think you're doing a great job, but when it comes to it, you ask certain other people and they go, yeah, he's okay. Well, if you want to become a good coach, ask your players what they want you to do differently. Ask your players and your parents, what do they like about it? Have some sort of honest feedback mechanism, an anonymous questionnaire, for example, at the end of the season, where that'll allow you to reflect on what you're doing, and then use that information constructively. Because most people, if you've got an okay side or you've got okay players, most people will be okay with being okay. But if you want to go beyond being okay, then you've got to be prepared to be challenged, and you've got to be prepared to challenge yourself. So, just be open about it with your coaching. What does make a good coach? And go and read other books. Go and read stuff that's away from football. I mentioned Legacy last weekend, which is more about team culture. James Kerr's book on the All Blacks, for example. So there's some real good stuff out there, but you've got to be a little bit choosy. You've got to be a little bit selective about what you're going to take on board. But feedback is essential. If you're an inexperienced coach, try and find a mentor. Get somebody who has got a bit of experience and has got a little bit of time to spend with you and say, well, look, yeah, that session was okay, but have you tried it this way, or have you thought about that? And then don't just dismiss it. Just think about it for a little bit and reflect and say, well, yeah, maybe, and then try it the other way and see what happens. You never know. The other part of David's question was, why is it difficult to find employment in the coaching industry? Now, he didn't say the football industry, which is the only industry really that I can speak about, because it's the only one that I work in. But there's a lot of qualified coaches and not a lot of jobs. And rightly or wrongly, people consider working in football as quite glamorous. Certainly in the pro game and academy football, but it's not particularly. You work long hours, you work unsocial hours most of the time, and if I'm honest, at the at most levels, at sort of certainly at Cat 3 level and below, the money's not that great. So you can be doing easily, you might be contracted for a 38-hour week, but in reality, with a lot of planning and follow-up stuff and your own education, that can easily creep up to 50, 60 hours a week. Okay, it's certainly not nursing, or it's not an important industry in that respect. But if you want to make a career, you've got to realise it, and you've got to expect that you're not going to earn a great deal of money to start off with. You're going to work a lot of hours that don't fit in, that are not conducive to a good social life, to a good family life, particularly if you've got young kids. And the money won't be great. If you've got a mortgage to pay, certainly working at the lower end of professional football, I hope you ain't got a great mortgage, a big mortgage, because you'll struggle. It's just an honest opinion. And then when you do get into it, it's not all sweetness and light and free tickets. It's not all watching Messi or Ronaldo or anybody else. You work at the level that you work at, and you gain experience, and hopefully you move up. And to be fair, it's doable. I've seen some coaches who've started as part-time coaches with not a massive amount of certainly not a massive amount of playing experience at the higher levels. Almost everybody's played at some level, but it is possible to progress. But it's not slow. If you're good, you'll get recognised for it, and you might get promoted. But at the same time, some of the people who are above you will see that as a threat. Certainly in football, there's a very limited number of full-time jobs, and those of us that have got them hang on to them a lot of the time. I'm not about to give my job up very easily. Well, whilst I need to work and need to earn a living, so it's a ruthless industry to work in. Is football. Not a lot of jobs, not great pay to start off with, and unless you're working at the higher levels. And there's a lot of coaches about. You see the numbers are starting to increase now. UEFA B, UEFA A licensed coaches. The number of kids who go to university to be PE teachers, for example. I sometimes wonder, and I questioned this even when I worked in further education, how many PE teachers does the world need? There's not that many jobs around. And like I say, people tend to stick in them where they can. It's not a job that you give up easily, because ultimately it's quite rewarding. You're working in football or another sporting industry. You're around the game. You can be around professional players, and there is that attraction side of it, but it's certainly not all glamour and multi-million-pound deals at all. So going back to blocks again now, Reece Sullivan asked me to explain the difference between a high, medium and a low block. I mean, it's basically areas of the pitch, Reece. So, for example, to go back to, I've got this set out at the minute. Rather than a high block, we would be talking about a high press. If the ball's central, can we condense the play? If we can stop them from playing out the back by good movement and hard work from our front three, their midfield three will have to come closer to get the ball, which means that our midfield three can consequently push up the pitch. Their strikers will get starved of possession, so our back four can push up the pitch. So the high press condenses play, hopefully in 1/3 of the pitch. If we can get the ball to go out here to the fullback, sorry, let me just. Okay. So I'm just reading some of these questions. Thank you. Right, so one of the things that I've asked my players to do, if we can get the ball here, for example, so with a good high press, we force the ball into a corner. What I want the players to do now is to try and, instead of letting them play in half a pitch, can we quarter the pitch? So in other words, can we really choke possession here? The Reds are starting to come and look for the ball. The closer they get to the ball, the tighter we get. Can we really quarter the pitch off and force it into as small an area as possible? There's my other goalkeeper. Here he is. So if we can get that to happen there, our goalkeeper can play outside the centre circle almost, because we've condensed play into that area there. As I just mentioned a minute ago, if we're playing and our tactic is that we're going to work on a mid block, so the Reds are coming out from the back. They might have imagine they've got the ball into midfield. Our striker's going to be here. Push in there, and we're compact there. I'm not going to draw my board because I really like it. But one of the things that we talk about in training is, obviously everybody knows about thirds of the pitch. There's my book, through the thirds. Thirds of the pitch. What we don't often talk about is splitting the pitch into lanes that way. So we try and work on a 5-lane principle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we can get them to play, if they're central, we want to try and give them the 3 lanes in the middle. We don't want to let them get down the sides. If the ball is wide, let me just take it higher up the pitch. I might have just gone off topic slightly here. Just shuffle these players around. If they've got the ball up high, the 5th lane, which is this one over here, so lane 1, lane 2, lane 3, lane 4, lane 5, channel 1 to 5, whatever you want to call it. In that position there, lane 5 we can leave blank because there's no danger there. So it just gives players a kind of a visual image of where we want to condense play. We can let that side of the pitch be free because the ball's there. It's no danger. There's nobody in there that's going to cause us any problems at all. If the Reds can transition the ball across the pitch and get out here, it's not a problem because it's moved 60 yards. While that's moving, everybody else is moving. Everybody else is coming across. So, like I say, 3/3 and 5 channels is a good way of teaching your players spatial awareness as much as anything else. In terms of a low block, and again I've mentioned this already, so keeper in goal, get your back 4 in place, your 3 midfield players. This is the kind of, I don't know if, I'm hoping you can see that from there. So let's say they've got 4-3-3, one of them's gone out and gotten the ball, 3 midfield players in there, their back 4 would obviously be pushed up. I would get at least 2 of my 3 forwards in this sort of position here and leave 1 up. So this would be my low block. Pressure on the ball. Full back there ready to double up or in case the wide player gets beat. 2 strikers are being marked. The furthest full back is the deepest player on the pitch, and depending where the ball is, takes his line off the back post, just inside the back post, so they don't get beat by late runs there. And again, we've left that channel free because there's no threat in there. But that low block, these players, their job there is to screen the pass that they want to get into the striker. If I brought in if 2 of my strikers have come back out of the 3 in that kind of position there. So a low block is really all about emergency defending, stopping them from getting into our box. and then if we win it back, oops, magnet stuck. If we win it back, looking to counter. Now, one thing that when Sky Sports used to do the player cam thing, I can remember watching it once with Arsenal playing, and the player cam was on Thierry Henry, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but I'm sure some of you have. When Arsenal were defending down here, Thierry Henry would go and stand there. So he'd stand pretty much on the halfway line, on the left-hand side of the pitch. So whenever they won the ball, they didn't even have to look. So they won the ball back from the opposition. They just knew that if they hit the ball there into that channel, they would find Thierry Henry, or he would find the ball. So that's one way of dealing with that, setting up the low block and then getting out from it. Let me just see if that's another question. Or if it's the same one. All right. Cool. So that's high press, mid block, and low block, pretty much in a nutshell. But it's, you know, the way that you set that up will depend on your formation and your players and your players' capabilities. So Wayne Homer asked me about this one, how to involve goalkeepers in sessions, and he said most grassroots clubs have no specialist goalkeeping coaches. So first of all, it's really important that you or your assistant coach knows that, or is able to, rather than knows, is able to do some work with your goalkeepers, because they'll be the ones that 9 times out of 10 people are turning around and blaming when you concede goals. Nick Buxton will be loving this, by the way. Nick's one of our goalkeeping coaches, and we often have, he often gives me a hard time about us giving goalkeepers a hard time. But what we tend to do, and certainly what I would do if we didn't have any specialist goalkeeper coaches on the night, is as much as possible, if we're doing passing drills and if we're doing rondos, for example, we try and get the goalkeepers to get involved. I'm sure you've all heard the statistic now about goalkeepers use their feet 7 times more than they use their hands. So your keepers have got to be, first and foremost, good shot stoppers. That goes without saying. But they've also got to be good footballers. They've got to be capable of receiving the ball on both feet, and they've got to be able to pass out. And you know, everybody that's watching in will have seen and heard Man City discarded Joe Hart because the coach didn't think that he was good enough with his feet, for example. Liverpool changed their goalkeeper because he wanted a keeper that had better distribution. So it's really important. So if you can, involve your goalkeepers in rondos, involve your goalkeepers in passing drills, but try not to neglect their specialist bit of the actual goalkeeping coaching itself. If you don't have a specialist goalkeeper coach, then do a little bit of reading, get on the basic level 1 or level 2 goalkeeping course, and try and dedicate a little bit of time to them, because they'll be the first ones that you look at when your team goes 1-0 down, or you consider what you consider to be a soft goal. The second part of Wayne's question, we spoke about this on Sunday, is the sort of the winning versus development argument, and he asked at what age would I refocus. I said it on Sunday, and I'll say it again now, that if the development processes that you put in place are based solidly around good formations, developing all your players in individual roles and responsibilities and in unit roles and responsibilities, so that your players know how to work together, then development and winning will go hand in hand. You won't win all your games. If you do, you're in the wrong league. You've been placed in the wrong league. But if you focus on development, you will get positive results some of the time. I can't say all of the time, it doesn't work like that, because other teams are doing the same as you. It's one of those things where, for me, the closer they get to me as the under-16 coach, I've got to get them ready to be passed on to the youth team, and they're playing under-18s football, competitive leagues against kids from other clubs who absolutely know 100% that in 18 months' time, their job could be that of a professional footballer. Could be. Because if Michael don't think you're good enough, then we'll start looking elsewhere for somebody to go into our under-23s development squad. So all the time, as kids get towards 16, 17, 18 years of age, it starts to become more career focused. So they should continue to develop even beyond under-18s football into under-23s. And listen, I still believe firmly that some of the young pros playing in the game still need to try and keep that learning mentality, and the better ones, the ones that go on and progress and have longer careers, will definitely benefit from maintaining a learning focus even when they get into the first team. They should always be going to the coaches and saying, how can I go to the senior pros? How can I get better? What can I do to develop myself, to make myself better, to become, to have your career? The pros that are still playing at 38, 39, 40 at a good level and producing really, really consistent performances. I don't see them getting asked enough by young players. Whether they're scared to talk to them, which they shouldn't be. Most of them are really open and engaging, but you've got to take responsibility as a player, like we do as a coach, for your own development, by going out and asking the right questions of the right people. So I don't think it refocuses, but I think that your focus certainly sharpens the closer that, in my environment, that players get to 16, because it starts to then become a job. I've put a little arrow by someone's question. All right, so this came from J. Roach. He said, should all coaches try to add to their knowledge to work with goalkeepers? I kind of already touched on that. I really do think that is really important. Sorry, I missed that. It was a question from lower down and I circled back up to it. Paul Hockley asked me about the pros and cons of one or two pivots in a 4-3-3 and how does it affect tactics. So let's just shove these back up here and I'll work with the blues. I don't know why, I normally work with the reds. So again, this business about tactics, and I'm sure that lots and lots of people would argue that tactics will break down anyway. It's players and what they can do. So there's two ways you can play with this 4-3-3. Well, there's probably more than two ways that you can play with a 4-3-3 in midfield. I prefer to play with one holding midfield player and two who are more attacking, because in a 4-3-3 it then gives us at least 5 players in and around their box when we're starting to attack and look to finish the attack. If you play it the other way around, so you play a point up triangle rather than a point down triangle, unless one of these two holding midfield players here has got a specific role to get into the box, you've only got 4. So that would be my take on that particular question that Paul asked. You can come up with your own list of pros and cons for playing a particular formation, and actually that's not a bad thing to do when you are thinking about What formation am I going to play next season, for example, if next season ever starts? Come up with a list of pros and cons. Why would I play 3-5-2? Why would I play 4-3-3 point up? Why would I play 4-3-3 point down? If you've got someone who is a natural CDM, talking in the kids' language, who is good at screening the back four, has got a good engine, he can get across the pitch to cover when they come out on a counter-attack there, blah, 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 both sides, then you might play 4-3-3 with the point of the triangle down. If you've got two of them, then you just reverse it. And the same goes for any other formation. Why did I play 3-5-2 this year? Because I only had one left-footed player. So we played with wing-backs. It doesn't necessarily suit them if they are particularly attack-minded, but it gives them another string to their bow. Let me just pop up here and see what's occurring. Okay. So, you know, the list of pros and cons for different formations and different positions is really, again, going back to what we spoke about earlier on, what makes a good coach is your knowledge of your players and your ability to self-reflect when it comes to why you're doing things. I know I do see people from time to time who say, right, next year we're going to play 3-5-2. And then when you ask them why, they go, well, because I fancy doing it. Well, again, I just go back to things that we've spoken about over the last few weeks. This isn't about you. The football's not about you. It's about your players. So, is 3-5-2 going to suit your players? And by making a list of pros and cons, you'll find out whether it does or it doesn't. So, start from there. Start from the player, not from the coach. When you look at formations, systems of play, anything else, look at it from the playing lens, not from the coaching lens. So if it suits your players, do it. If it doesn't, if it suits your agenda as a coach, you know, you want to play 3-5-2 next season because you never played 3-5-2 before, are you in it for the right reasons? We're not doing it for us in the majority of cases. We're doing it for the 11 boys or girls that you put out on the field on a Saturday or a Sunday whenever you play your games. So I've got a couple more questions which I'll go through. If anybody else has got anything that they want to ask, bearing in mind that's an hour has absolutely flown again. So if anybody else has got any questions, bang them up on the screen now and I'll try and pick them up before we go, because I think there's only one more person that's asked me anything, or two more. So Kelly McAleeny asked, how often should players play out of position and at what age should they play in their best / most comfortable position? It's a question that gets asked quite a bit around academy football and then gets a little bit misinterpreted once it starts to creep outside the academy walls. We have a thing about kids playing in numerous different positions in the foundation phase. So playing small-sided football, under 9s through to under 12s in our case, where they play 5v5, 7v7 and 9v9. Get lots of experience playing in different positions. At under 13, when they start playing 11-a-side, for me, right back, right midfield, centre midfield, right-sided centre back. So an area of the pitch at sort of under 13, under 14. By the time they get to under 15 and under 16, and this is quite a generalisation because I know, and I mentioned it on Sunday just gone, that some players have found their position much, much later. But generally, by 15 or 16, it should be an area of the pitch for me. right back, right midfield, right sided centre back, for example. That little triangle area there, that player should be reasonably comfortable in all of those. Certainly by under 16s, probably only going to be playing in one or two positions because, again, referring to academy football, we're making a decision on under 16s based on, can I now push that player up to the youth team and challenge to play on a regular basis in that position. You might with grassroots football play them, take that sort of that global 360 positional mentality into your first season of 11-a-side football. But from generally, if this player here is right-footed, he ain't going to benefit a great deal from going and playing as a left winger. Although having said that, it will give him an idea of what it's like for his direct opposition to play. Where do they want to go? Where do they like to go? That kind of thing. Likewise with a centre forward and a centre back. Put the centre forward into the centre back position in training every now and again, so he gets an idea of where there might be space, or what it might feel like to try and play out of the back. But that's kind of a sort of a catch-all answer really. For foundation phase, small-sided football, play all over the pitch, and that might include your goalkeepers. Generally speaking, with academy football, it doesn't work like that, but occasionally it does. They come to us as goalkeepers because that's where they want to play. And then just one more question that got asked this morning on Twitter by Dick Beard. He asked me about midfield movement to open up passing lanes into strikers. So another little tactical one. So Blues are coming out with the ball. They've got a midfield three in front of them. So the question was around the movements of these three players here in order to get, let's just get these ones up in the right place. So what kind of movements can a midfield three make in order for us to get the ball into these three strikers? Well, first of all, if the defenders are bringing the ball out, we've generally got one who's going to show for the ball. The number 4, the play. These players might do that and split wide, but if they do that, it makes it really difficult for any sort of rotation. So if the 4 comes to get on the ball and the 7 stays right up his back like that, the only thing he's going to be able to do is bounce it, either in there or in there. Now, by staying wide, what that has opened up is the option then for that pass, although it's to another midfield player. So if these three players in here, if I'm working with my midfield players when we're doing unit work, I would expect a lot of movement where these players rotate all the time. Now, it's all right saying what kind of movements do the midfield three make to open up the passing lanes if you don't work on the front three. So if these three players are going to do things like that, for example, and open up that passing lane, then these three up here have got to understand where the gaps are. We've created a gap, we've created a space in there. These guys have got to be prepared to come in and fill it and willing to get on the ball. So now, when we play out from the back, let's say that this is the number 9 who's dropped short in there. When we play in there, this player here has got to react as this ball goes past. So the ball's going into the striker. This player now turns to go that way. We can get that kind of, that kind of movement there to get the players in higher up the pitch. Now we can go overlapping there. We can go overlapping down the other side. So it's all very well the three in midfield moving around and rotating, to try and create a little bit of space, either to get on the ball or get the strikers on the ball. But these three up front have got to work in relation to these three in midfield. The other thing to remember, and again, it's about don't be sniffy with football, don't be snobby with football. If this player here, so they've gone tight in midfield, wherever they are, we've got three strikers up there against their back four. This pass, and I'm just deliberately going to over-exaggerate this. This pass is a good pass because it takes out six players. So don't be too snobby about, oh yeah, it's got to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15, 20 passes before the ball gets anywhere near the strikers. A good pass is the right pass to the right player at the right time in the game with good technique. So that ball there, there's nothing wrong with that ball there. But the three midfield players coming short and drawing six players, so three strikers and three midfield players towards the ball carrier, if he can hit that pass there, great. Don't get too sniffy, don't get too snobby about football and think that everything has got to be on the grass. Yeah, it's great, it's nice, it's pretty, and it can be effective, and it does give you players lots and lots of returns in terms of being comfortable on the ball, coming short to receive, all those kinds of things, playing under pressure. But the pass, the best pass in the game, and I've set it up deliberately just to be controversial and finish on a controversial note if there's no more questions there. I'll come back to that question in a second, Paul. There's nothing wrong. This pass in the game, from here, my centre-back dribbling out with a ball, my centre-forward pulls onto the centre-back's shoulder, that pass there, that takes out everybody in the opposition's team and gets my centre-forward in there, is the best pass in the game. The most effective pass in the game. Goes all the way over the top, takes out everybody, it's delivered with quality from there, not just hoofed up the pitch, but delivered with quality, get off, delivered with quality into the space behind the back line is the most effective pass in the game. So, I'm just going that's pretty much all of the questions there. I'll just pop up to the old bones creaking there. So Paul Hockley's just asked, when you coach a session, is the main focus on the individuals or is it on units within the team? As I've said before, we work to a syllabus and the players will have their own individual learning objectives within that session and for different times of the season. So although let's say the session's on playing out from the back, for example, the majority of the time you're going to be spent on is going to be spent on your defenders bringing the ball out, your midfield players coming to show for the ball, but you can't neglect your forwards. So they still have roles and responsibilities within that session, and one of the better ways to explain it, if you like, with the back four coming out with the ball, if you put your So just sort of over-exaggerate something again. If we're working on playing out from the back, and there's two of us working, so I've got a co-coach, for example, my co-coach can be working with our front three on the high press. So the back four are getting something out of it, and some of our midfield players, this could be in half a pitch, and my front three, my regular front three, are getting something out of it because they're stopping them coming out. Because you can't make it too easy. You don't want it to be too easy when you're playing out from the back or any other thing. You've got to set up so that there's a degree of realism and a realistic degree of challenge for all your players. So that's, everybody should get something out of every session. Every individual and every unit, each unit within your session, everybody should get something out of it. And I think that's it. So look, there's no more questions in my book. There's no more questions popping up on the screen. So again, this is kind of, I'll keep this going as long as people are interested and getting something out of it. I'll probably just leave it and do it once a week. So we'll be looking at this time next week, maybe Wednesday afternoon. The sessions will, the broadcasts, if you like, will stay on my Facebook page, and I'll post them to the various coaching groups where I've advertised it, and some of you have joined in from. I'll post it onto Twitter. Hopefully, as I said, people are getting something out of it. I will look to, I might do a little competition at some point this week to try and raise a little bit more money for Huntington's Disease Association. I've got a couple of copies now, some extra copies of my book, and maybe just have a quick sort of, I've got to look at how to set it up, whether I can do something on Just Giving where 20 people stick in a £5 and I'll do some sort of random number generator to pick out a winner. Just something as simple as that. I'll raise £100. So that's it for this particular session. Hopefully, like I say, most people got something out of it at whatever point you joined, and it'll stay live now on the various platforms. So I'll stick something on the various Facebook pages with regards to when we're going to do it again, and it'll probably be midweek next week, next Wednesday or something like that. Okay, so there's no more questions. I've covered everything in the book, and I'll catch up with you again later. Stay safe, everyone. Bye.